In the original Dark Souls 2, the player is referred to as the bearer of the curse. This curse is that of undeath and hollowing. The player cannot truly die, but when they respawn at the bonfire, they lose a part of themselves and become more and more hollow. The bearer of the curse came to Drang Lake seeking a cure. When they first arrive, they're given an effigy that restores their humanity, but it does not prevent them from hollowing on death. Is there a way to truly break this curse?
What do you see in the flames? Find the crowns and your own answers. The crowns hold the strength of lords from times long past. Seek adversity.
In the months following the release of Dark Souls 2, From Software released 3 DLC: Crown of the Sunken King, Crown of the Old Iron King, and Crown of the Ivory King. Each DLC features a new area, new bosses, and as you can guess from the names, a crown of a lord from time long past. The crowns in this DLC are the key to breaking the curse, for when combined with the King's Crown from the base game, the player receives Vendrick's Blessing, which negates the curse of hollowing. Today I want to take a deeper look into the level design of the Crown of the Ivory King DLC, the last crown that the player needs to acquire to receive Vendrick's Blessing. Before we begin, let's discuss the metrics that the level is designed around. In Dark Souls 2, the player can walk, run, and roll. The player's equipment load has a negligible effect on their walk or run speed, but greatly affects their roll's distance, iframes, and recovery. For this video, my character has under 70% equip load, which is the breakpoint at which the player fat rolls. The player cannot jump vertically in this game, meaning that if there is a platform elevated above the player's knee, the player cannot pass. This is useful in creating a lot of one-way valves, which this level has a lot of. The player can perform a long jump when running, but this mechanic won't really be relevant in this level. While not particularly relevant to the physical design of the level, the player's attack power is important to consider. If they are not strong enough to consistently defeat the enemies in the level, then they will have a much more difficult time playing it. My player is at the end of the game, he has beaten the final boss, and he is dual wielding plus 10 great axes with 75 strength, so this should not be a problem for me. The DLC can be accessed at the Shrine of Winter. When interacting with the pedestal, the player will be transported to an icy landscape. Utilizing the rule of thirds, the first thing the player sees is a massive wall. The angle of the wall in the shot draws this line that guides the player to the right, urging them to look right first. Upon looking right, they see more of this wall, and a door leading to a bridge. If the player has acquired the frozen flower, they may open the door and proceed. The player walks up a set of stairs and finds a bonfire at the top. At the end of this bridge, they see a large frozen gate and some icy mist blowing out of it. Walking towards this gate causes this to happen. This is a classic example of a warning scene that actually makes the player want to continue on. Continuing on, they can faintly see a palace through the icy blizzard, and are given 2 paths. If they head left, they will once again hear the voice. If the player does not listen and continues anyway, they'll come across a fog gate. After going through the fog gate, they will get some dialogue, and then enter a boss fight with Ava. The player, however, can't actually see Ava, and will most likely die to their attacks. There is nothing else on the left, so going that way is a complete dead end. Let's try going right. We come across our first hallway enemy, a frozen soldier. This enemy is actually one of the weaker ones in this DLC, but it is just strong enough to dissuade any players that are not high enough level. Inside the room, they will see a lit torch. In Dark Souls 2, you can light a torch at a source of fire, and this provides dynamic lighting that allows the player to see darker areas better. However, if the player lights a torch here and then tries to go outside, the torch will actually extinguish because of the blizzard that is going on. This will be important later. Another thing the player encounters in this area is an elevator, but the elevator is blocked off with debris, and there isn't anything the player can do immediately to clear the debris, so they just have to move onward. The player encounters a white cloaked enemy sitting on the ground, and they don't seem to actually aggro onto the player. Free souls, I guess. Walking down the stairs, they'll come across some dogs. Oh great, there are dog enemies in this level. Moving on, they come across this fountain. Aside from being introduced to slightly stronger enemies, this fountain area is important because this is the first time that the player is introduced to frozen objects, whether they realize it or not. Frozen objects will become very important later. Shortly after moving up the stairs to the left, the player finds themselves with another choice. There are two doors, one to the left and one to the right. The door to the right leads the player to some stairs that will take them up to the roof of the building they're in. On the roof, they see 3 chests. But what is this? They can't be opened because they're frozen shut. Casting any kind of fire spells or hitting the chests with any sort of fire weapon does not seem to have an effect. So, I guess there's nothing we can do. Let's go back down and head to the left. After fighting through a group of enemies, the player once again finds themselves with a choice. Do they continue forward, or do they go right? If they continue forward, past these piles of snow, they will find a mysterious locked door, surrounded by 4 unlit torch holders. Standard video game logic dictates that if all 4 of these torch holders are lit, then the door will open. However, if the player tries to light their torch with the flame butterfly, they'll find that nothing happens. This was foreshadowed by the event earlier, where when we tried to carry the torch out into the blizzard, it became extinguished. It seems that the player will have to come back when there is no blizzard. Going back to the other path, the player will find a one-way valve leading to a bonfire. They can now leave, go level up, go upgrade their weapons, go buy some consumables, whatever, and then come back. Or just heal and then continue onwards. The next area is, you guessed it, another snow-covered landscape with a bunch of enemies scattered around. However, off to the side, there is actually a one-way valve that leads back to the fountain area. This is significant because the travel time to the fountain from this bonfire is faster than the other one, so the player can more effectively retrace their steps if they want to. Continuing onwards, the player will find themselves on the outer wall once again. If they go left, they will see a few enemies and a door at the end. Unfortunately, this door is locked at the moment, so let's turn around and go back the other way. There are stairs leading up, and there's also a door. If we go through the door, the first thing we see is something covered in ice. But we can't think too hard about it because there is an enemy in the room as well. So, we defeat the enemy, and now we get to take a closer look at what's inside this room. There are more frozen chests! But, what is this? One of the things that's frozen doesn't look like a chest. What is the... Oh. It's a mimic. Alright. Good to know. Let's continue. The player travels up a rampart, where the first thing they see is a path that is blocked off by a massive block of ice. If they go to the right, they will additionally see a Pharaoh's lock that is frozen solid, so they cannot actually put a lockstone inside of it. At this point, the player must be thinking, okay, there's a lot of frozen things that are cutting off areas that I should be able to access. There's probably some way that I'm going to end up melting all this. And this thought makes the player feel smart. They're going to be motivated to backtrack through the level and try to revisit all of these locations that they couldn't before, just to see what they hold. Up ahead, there are a couple more enemies and a door on the right. Going through this door, the player will see a lever and some chains. Okay, they probably just unlocked an elevator. Let's pull the lever and see what happens. After hearing the chains rattle and watching the animation play, the elevator comes up to the player. But it's full of debris. Oh wait! Did the player just unblock the path that was blocked before at the beginning of the level? Okay, well that's another thing they have to go back and check now. Alright, sick. The player finds themselves on the outer wall once more, and they see another door just like the one from before with the frozen chests in it. There's a lot of dogs inside, and a spiral staircase going up. However, the spiral staircase is actually broken, and this leaves the player to wonder, why would they go through the trouble of making this broken staircase? Maybe there is something at the top? But if so, how do I get there? Oh well, let's just move on. Going down the steps, they move on through this tight corridor. They see stairs that they walk down carelessly, and oh, it was a one-way valve. They can't jump back up. Alright, well, I guess the only way now is forward. My reasoning for this one-way valve being here is that the developer really wants the player to not backtrack at this point and go back to the bonfire. And we'll see why in a second. Up ahead, there is a curved bridge that when the player steps onto, they will hear the voice again, speaking more dialogue. At the end of the bridge, they will see a glowing thing. They go up to investigate and find a corpse. Walking up to the corpse, they receive a pop-up. Pick up item. Okay, let's see what this corpse has. Eye of the Priestess. What is that? If the player opens up their inventory and finds the item, they can read the description, which reads, "The eye of the first priestess who watched over Eleam Lois allows one to see the unseen. All the great priestesses replaced one of their birth eyes with this, returning it after their term was complete." Well, that's kind of morbid. But wait. Allows one to see the unseen. Oh! Whatever was invisible before is visible now. And this is immediately proven, because if the player continues on the bridge path, they will encounter a knight that could not be seen before. If the player had just walked past the Eye of the Priestess and continued on, they would have gotten hit by this knight and not known what was happening. At the end of the path is a fog gate that leads the player directly to the next section of the level, and right in front of them is a bonfire. After doing whatever the player needs to do at the bonfire, the player can move on. However, they will shortly find that they are blocked off by a wall of ice. So, there's not much they can do, and it's time to backtrack once again. Now that they have the Eye of the Priestess, they can go back and fight Ava, who was invisible before. Turns out, Ava is just a big white tiger. So this should be an easy fight. Right? After defeating Ava, the player is able to proceed to the big palace that they saw at the beginning. Turns out, it's called the Grand Cathedral. Inside the Grand Cathedral, they will be met with a bonfire and a frozen chest. How many more of these are they going to throw at us? Alright, well, whatever. You can proceed forward and talk to the woman who has been speaking to you this entire time. Her name is Alsana, and she is the queen of the Ivory King. She does a lore dump on the player, explaining what happened to Eleam Lois, and how the Ivory King was consumed by the old chaos, and how she wishes for somebody to come and put the Ivory King out of his misery. Since you just defeated Ava, surely you're strong enough to grant me this wish. Here, let me undo the blizzard. The player hears a bunch of shattering noises, and when they turn around, they will see that the strategically placed frozen chest is no longer frozen. Should they start walking towards it, Alsana will start speaking once more. If the player walks towards the threshold under Alsana that she just opened, they'll see the boss fog gate for the Ivory King boss fight. If they wanted to, they could go and fight him right now. However, as the player approaches the fog gate, they will see what looks to be like a knight, and if they get close enough, the knight will draw his sword as if he was ready for battle. This is supposed to afford that this knight will be your ally in the boss fight. Yet, something is off. Why are there 4 thrones if there's only 1 knight? Should there be 4 of them? This is something that the player will be asking themselves, and it will make them consider maybe I shouldn't fight the boss right now. Maybe I should go and explore a little bit more. So with that, let's warp back to the first bonfire and explore the now unfrozen Ilium Lois. After warping back to the first bonfire, the player can easily see that the entire landscape has changed. There is no longer an icy blizzard that is obscuring the player's vision, and the player has a better view of the outer wall area, especially this one ladder that they don't seem to remember climbing. Revisiting the room that was originally blocked off by debris, the player finds a chest. Inside the chest is a spell. Okay, well this isn't really useful if you're not a spellcaster. The player turns around and, oh, wait a minute, a ladder? What could be at the top of this ladder? They climb it, and they proceed to find one of the most fashionable armor sets in all of the DLCs. Nice. Continuing on, they will notice something different. Those white enemies that didn't aggro on the player before are now knife-wielding assassins. This effectively increases the amount of enemies that the player has to deal with when they're traversing through the level. On top of that, when the player reaches the fountain area once again, they will see that all of the ice blocks that they ignored on their first pass are now open, and inside of them were more enemies. It's crazy how flipping a single Boolean value can essentially alter the experience of a level. Nothing was added or removed, everything was there from the start. The only thing that changed was the state of whether the blizzard was on or off, and it fundamentally changes the way that the level is played. For the sake of time, I won't be going over every single little detail of the level that was affected by the state change, but I will be going over the major areas that have opened up to the player because of it. Right after the fountain area, there is a massive bridge. Unfortunately, it is broken, so the player can't cross it all the way. However, there is a conveniently placed elevator that leads down to a town area that the player can actually see from the bridge. Going down the elevator, the player encounters these spiky ice rats that deal damage to the player if they are attacked. Weaving their way through the arches of the town and dodging the spells of the mages above, the player reaches this ladder. They can use it to climb up to this elevated area, of which there are 2 buildings of note. One of them has a bonfire. The other one has a phantom inside of it. Normally in this game, if you see a phantom, it's usually trying to kill you. However, this one just waves at you, and then sort of beckons you to follow them. Okay. It guides you through the buildings and leads you to a lever that opens up the main gate of the town. After pulling the lever, they start attacking you. Classic Dark Souls 2 moment. Once everything has been dealt with, the player can go through the main gate and enter this icy cave. Inside the cave, there's a lot of loot lying around, and a mini-boss that looks like a giant ice worm. After clearing this area, the player can move forward and find an elevator that will lead them up to the other side of the bridge that was broken before. There is a tower at the top of this hill that the player can travel up to. Inside the tower, we see an imprisoned knight of Ilium Lois. By opening the door, we free him, and he pledges to serve us in our fight against the Ivory King. 1 down, 2 to go. Starting back at the fountain area, the player can proceed through the level as normal, opening up all the chests that were frozen before. And then they come across the 4-torch holder puzzle again. Now, since there is no blizzard, they can light the 4 torches, and voila! The door opens. Through the door, there is a chamber with a lot of tough enemies, but what's important is the item at the end of the chamber. The Garrison Ward Key. This is the key that we need to open up that door on the outer wall that was locked before. Behind this door is a bonfire and a sled. Well, technically it's a coffin, but in these games, those two are basically interchangeable. If the player climbs into the coffin, it will slide off the wall and into the frigid outskirts below. Now, technically, Frigid Outskirts is a different level from Ilium Lois, but I'm going to include it because the level design is infuriatingly simple and basic. The player wakes up in a vast, empty snowfield. Emphasis on vast, and emphasis on empty. There is nothing here. The player wanders around in this massive area looking for something of interest, and when they do find something of interest far off in the distance, they have to walk 2 minutes to get to it. And as if that wasn't bad enough, every now and then an ice storm occurs, and during this ice storm, this very strong ice horse enemy that can cast lightning magic for some reason spawns and tries to kill you. After about 5 to 10 minutes of walking, after using up all your heals on fighting off ice horses, the player hopefully arrives at this bridge. On the other side of this bridge is a boss fog gate. Finally, something interesting. The player enters the boss fog just to see what was so special that they had to walk 10 minutes to get there. Turns out, it's just the Ava boss fight again. Except this time, there's 2 of them. And they're colored differently, so you know that they do slightly more damage. There is no checkpoint. If the player dies, they have to walk all the way back from the start. And even if they do manage to beat the boss, there is no special reward. Beating this boss and reaching the end of this area has absolutely no impact on the rest of the DLC. It feels like it's just there to infuriate the player, and I love it so much. Back in Aleum Lois, continuing on from the garrison bonfire, the player is now able to access the path that was frozen on the rampart. They find themselves at the top of a tower with a lot of scaffolding and ladders. They can use the ladders to descend down to the bottom level, but upon doing so, they find that there is a pack of hungry dogs waiting to ambush them. What I like about this encounter is that the dogs are hidden behind a wall, and they don't come out until the player hits a certain elevation on this last ladder. And if they decide, nope, I'm climbing back up the ladder, then the dogs will return to their original position, waiting to ambush another player who does. Smart dogs. After exiting the tower, the player will find themselves on a bridge once again. Just like the previous one, at the end of this bridge, there is a prison cell that is holding another knight of Aleum Lois. The player opens the cell, and that is the second knight under their service. Returning on the bridge, the player will find an elevator that will take them up to the area right after the Eye of the Priestess, where the bonfire was. It's time to finally explore this last section of the level. This area has the strongest enemies, including these golems that activate once something dies near them. One of the golems is conveniently placed next to a mimic, so if you want whatever the mimic drops, you also have to defeat a golem. If that doesn't sound too bad, try this chest that is surrounded by 3 inactive golems, and the only way to open it is to activate them. But wait, I saved the best for last. See this chest right here? I know what you're thinking. No, it's not a mimic. But there is a dude disguised as a barrel that waits for you to open it so that he can backstab you. Thank you, Dark Souls. After enduring these novelties, you eventually reach the top of this area, where there is a prison cell containing the last knight of Aleum Lois. After freeing him, the player can take the stairs behind him that conveniently lead to the Grand Cathedral. And with that, the player has beaten the level. All that's left now is for the player to charge into battle alongside the Knights of Aleum Lois and put down the Ivory King. While we're here, I'm just going to talk about the boss fight a little bit. The boss arena is essentially, unsurprisingly, a large circle. However, there are 3 gates that infinitely spawn enemies on an interval throughout the entire fight. These enemies are also Knights of Aleum Lois, or at least they were before they were corrupted by the old chaos. Your uncorrupted knights will help you fight wave after wave of these enemies. After a certain amount of the enemies have been defeated, your knights will actually sacrifice themselves to freeze the gates to prevent any more from spawning. Around the time when all 3 gates would be sealed is when the Ivory King finally emerges from the flames. If any of your knights are still alive, he will make short work of them, leaving the battle to just you 2. 1v1, hollow versus hollow. After finally defeating the king, you receive his crown. The player warps back to the Grand Cathedral, where Alsana talks to them for one last time. She gives the player her gratitude and a massive lore dump. This may seem kinda lame, but consider that Dark Souls is infamous for having an incredibly vague story. It is a very rare occurrence that the player receives a direct explanation of what has been happening in the world that they're in, so when it does happen, it is a nice treat. And now, the player has the last crown that they need to receive Vendrick's blessing, so that they may undo their curse and learn to be human again.